And welcome to Riverside Episcopal Church. Our podcast each and every week is where faith, community, and everyday life intertwine. We believe in being guided by God's Word and embracing every heart. You're invited to join us each and every Sunday at 10 a.m., and you can find more about us at riversidemcalla.org. Let's dive into God's Word this week with Reverend Jeff Evans.
Okay, so a few years ago, I got really into this financial blog called Mr. Money Mustache. And the whole vibe of Mr. Money Mustache is if you engage in just radical frugality, not moderate frugality, radical frugality, we're talking about rice and beans and biking everywhere, then you can retire early. That's his vibe. Now, well, I never intended to retire early. You don't really retire from ministry. I got really into this blog to the point where I really started driving my family insane. I mean, myself insane too, but kind of everybody around me. As I got deeper and deeper into it, as I'm wont to do, I've been known to have like a 6-week enthusiasm. I don't know if any of y'all are similar to this, but I get obsessed with something for about 6 weeks. About 3 weeks in, I start to wane. This is a little bit longer, but like I usually do, I started to lose steam on my enthusiasm for radical frugality. And it was at the same time that I couldn't help but notice is that the ethos around this idea, radical frugality so one can retire early, is actually in conflict with Christianity. Subtly in conflict. And it's subtly in conflict because in the Christian worldview, work is not something to be endured. Work is actually a gift from God, where we have the opportunity to glorify God by doing our best, by making the world better, by serving the people who God puts in front of us. That actually Christianity says work is not something that we just have to gut it out for as long as we absolutely have to do it. What we're supposed to do is take our work and find God's call in it. This morning in Isaiah 65, I think you see that dynamic at play. I think you see where Christianity started to get that in Isaiah 65. Because I'm going to argue this morning that in Isaiah 65, what you see are the economics of heaven. That's the idea I want to share with you this morning. The economics of heaven. Okay, to understand that, we've got to do a little Bible study. Less than I want to do, but a little bit of Bible study, so go with me on this. There was a real Isaiah. He walked the streets of Jerusalem. He was a priest and he was a prophet, and he said some very challenging things to the leaders of his time and wrote some really awesome poetry at the same time. And he wrote around the 8th century BC. And he was warning the Israelites that if they didn't return to God, there was going to be a disaster. And there was a disaster. It's called the Babylonian conquest. Now, Isaiah is a big book. If you've ever sat down to read it from cover to cover, it's a daunting book. It's the first of what we call the major prophets. And they're only major because they're the biggest prophetic books in the Bible. Isaiah is the biggest, so it's the first book of the major prophets. The minor prophets, those are the ones in the end, the one that we kind of get hazy on the names of, right? Zechariah. We usually remember Amos and Micah. Zephaniah, get a little hazy on that. But they're important too, but they're only minor because they have shorter works. So Isaiah has this big book in the middle of the Bible. And it has sections. It's what scholars call Isaiah 1, 2, and 3. And third Isaiah, from where Isaiah 65 is today, is not actually written by historic Isaiah. It's written by a poet and a prophet in the school of Isaiah, influenced of Isaiah, and it happens hundreds of years after Isaiah actually lived. And at this point in the story, the Babylonian conquest has happened, and the Israelites are living as little better than slaves in Babylon. But they got hope. They got a lot of hope. Because the Persian Empire is on the rise. And they have a sense that if the Persian Empire can conquer the Babylonians, the Persians are going to be kinder and nicer and let them go back to Israel, which is exactly what happened. But this is right before that happened. In Isaiah 65, what Isaiah, and we imagine all the Israelites are doing, is dreaming of what life is going to be like at home. Isn't that a beautiful thing? When we get out of this terrible situation, when we get home, life is going to be so good and so pleasant and so rich. But because Isaiah is a poet, all the prophets were also poets. Isaiah takes that very human idea of what happens when we're going to go home, and Isaiah starts to riff on it. Isaiah starts to riff and think about, well, what about if there's a homecoming that's even better than the one we're excited about? Because we know when we go home, there's still going to be some trouble, right? We're still going to have issues. But what about there could be a time of ultimate homegoing where all the struggles of this life will be done away with, where we'll be satisfied and everyone will be happy and overjoyed. The ultimate homegoing that Isaiah 65 is about heaven and what that can and what that will look like. Now, I want you to point out, I want you to notice, when Isaiah gets to riffing about what the homegoing of heaven is going to look like, look how many economic details he comes up with. It's really fascinating. He's talking about houses, and he's talking about crops, and he's talking about vineyards, and he's talking about trees. That would make sense from a people who were often desperately poor, to think about a place where they were economically cared for and not experiencing material privation. What we get is the economics of heaven. Now, the Jewish worldview, which becomes the Christian worldview, is that this world is not some miserable thing to be endured, kind of like the work thing is not meant to be endured. We are meant to live as citizens of heaven here on earth. We're meant to follow God in this life and in the next. So if we understand a little bit about the economics of heaven, we as faithful people are meant to be, well, what if we could live in more to the economics of heaven here in earth? What if our little patch of ground, our little home, our little church, our little community could reflect the divine economy more and more? Well, good news, beloved, is that it does and it can because of the grace and ministrations of our Lord Jesus Christ. So I want to share 3 aspects of how the heavenly economy can become our economy right here and right now in our church and in the details of our lives. The first aspect of the economics of heaven is moderation. Isn't that an old school word? It sounds so dusty. Just a dusty word, moderation. I sound like I'm talking like I'm a 19th century person. I might as well be a Victorian. I think we kind of are Victorians, but I won't digress. Moderation is earning enough and then wanting what you earn. Moderation is the art of contentment, which I think you and I know is really hard. It is incredibly hard to want what we have, to take what God has given us and to celebrate it and to rest in it and to simply enjoy it. That's a struggle in my life. It's a struggle because of how we're put together, our human nature, but it may be even more of a struggle for modern people because you are the most advertised to people in the history of the world. Last year in the United States alone, there was $390 billion spent on advertising to you and to me. It's the water we swim in. And that advertising is meant to what they call manufacture discontent. Manufacture discontent. I want you to notice this week. I want you to watch the commercials that you take in and think about what you see on your phones and realize most of it is intending to make you and I think that our phone, our toaster, our refrigerator, and our car looks old and shabby. Because if we can be convinced of those things, then we live into what the advertisers want us to live into, which is perpetual consumption. The moving of one consumptive exercise to the next, which funds more advertising and more debt and becomes an unvirtuous cycle of discontent, advertising, and consumption over and over and over and over again. And y'all, I'm as tied up in this as you are. I claim no expertise in avoiding this rat race of discontent. But I believe, and I know you believe too, that our God is more powerful than $390 billion. Our God is stronger than even the strong powers of advertising and consumption. And in fact, the worship of God is a contentment technology. Going to church, what y'all are doing right now, empowers one to not be so influenced or so overtaken by that cycle, but to live in a different way. To look at what one have as gifts and not as old shabby things to be tossed aside. Being a Christian, coming to church, worshiping, doing fellowship, giving of your hard-earned resources, that is all God-given, indexed contentment technology, and it's old and it's strong and it works. It really does work. Part of our worship today, beloved, is to create the divine economy in our own hearts and in our own church and in our own community. Okay, so that's moderation. The cool thing about moderation is that moderation begets joy. Moderation begets joy. Did you hear that great line in Isaiah 65? I'm going to make Jerusalem a rejoicing. Oof, I want that. Okay, so February 22nd of 2020, there was a regular old NHL game. The Carolina Hurricanes and the Toronto Maple Leafs were playing one another in Toronto. If you need a primer on professional hockey and NHL, Ace is our guy. All right, he understands this world of professional hockey. Anyway, they're having a normal game, and then, as almost never happens, both the goaltender and the backup goaltender of the Carolina Hurricanes gets hurt, both of them. And so David Ayres, a 42-year-old father from Ontario who had never played a minute of professional hockey, dons the pads and becomes the goaltender for the Carolina Hurricanes. He saved 8 shots and the Hurricanes won the game. You see, in the NHL, every home team has to provide what they call an emergency backup goaltender who can play for either team if both of their tenders get put out of the game, and it almost never happens. But it happened that night, and they won. And David Ayres became a phenomenon in the hockey world. A lifelong Canadian, he was declared an honorary citizen of the state of North Carolina. The city of Raleigh, North Carolina declared February 25th, my birthday, David Ayres Day in Raleigh, North Carolina from now till going forward. He became a sensation. But after a few weeks of excitement, David Ayres went back to being a building manager and a sometime Zamboni driver. There's a lot of cool things about that story, but the reason I'm sharing it with you is that David Ayres didn't make a dime off any of this. E-Bugs, emergency backup goaltenders, are volunteers. And so David Ayres was asked, is that really unfair? You've kind of become a phenomenon. He said, no. I get to see NHL hockey games for free dozens of times a year. I hang out with my friends. I get to be part of the team. I do this for the love of the game. Beloved, look at that. There's so much money and so much fame and so much stuff tied up, particularly in professional sports. But God has the ability, even into the wild world of professional sports, to take somebody living a moderate, contented, happy life and burst a moment of joy onto the scene. Burst a moment of joy and gladness that we're still chuckling about 5 years later. God, through the gift of moderation, can work joy in the details of any life, including part-time Zamboni drivers. All right, the third. We've noticed in the economy of heaven that moderation and joy travel together with generosity. Moderation and joy travel together with generosity. Think about this. If I'm so tied into this manufactured discontent, and I'm so tied into this cycle of perpetual consumption, then I find it very hard to be generous because I'm always grasping, thinking, wanting something that I don't have. But if God has done a work of moderation and contentment in my heart, then I have enough left over, both in my heart and in my mind and in my world, to be generous. And God can even work a change of heart to where I can look for opportunities to be generous. God has that ability to do that in our hearts. There was a theologian in the 5th century named Theodoret of Syr. Oh, don't you love church? We all came together of our free will, and we're talking about a Byzantine theologian. And he's got good stuff to say. Our buddy Theodoret. Theodoret of Syr noticed that in Isaiah 65, there's some really cool stuff going on with the animals at the end. Now, to point that out, the ancients didn't think of animals like you and I think of them. The ancients thought that each animal had like a kind of particular personality trait, like the wise owl or the clever fox. Well, the lions in the ancient world were the kings of the ancient world. We still think about that, right? The king of the king of the whatever, Lion King, king of the jungle. Thank you. And they thought that the lions were strong and they were powerful, but just like earthly kings, they were greedy and capricious. And they took from what they didn't earn. Do you see in the end that the lion is eating straw like the cattle? What Theodoret pointed out is the lion has stopped being a carnivore and is sharing in the enoughness with all the other animals. All right, so the lion has had a change of heart and a change of character, and is now sharing with the other animals as opposed to taking advantage of them, and everybody has enough. It's a really, really powerful image. And beloved, I would argue that work of moderation to joy to generosity is at work in you, in your heart, in our church. You'll know we're in the middle of our pledge campaign, and people have been turning in their pledge cards, and what you give and your commitments are completely confidential. I don't share them with anybody, but I do have the privilege of seeing that you guys are incredibly generous. The people of this church, in a high inflationary moment, during an affordability crisis in our country, with all the many demands that all of us have on our time and our resources, are giving generously to be a part of what God is doing here in our church. And y'all, it moves me, and I'm so glad that I get to be a part of it. And I'm arguing this morning that that's not an accident. That this, our church, is a little outpost of the economy of heaven. Our church is this little place where we're pulling back from the manipulation and coercion of our culture, and we're embracing who God meant for us to be, becoming people who are trying to be contented with what God has given us, who are excited about the bursting forth of joy, and who are eager for opportunities for generosity. Let me leave you with this. Isaiah 65 is a vision of what may come in the future. But when the early Christians read this chapter, what they realized is this is actually a vision of what happens when Jesus takes over somebody's life, takes over somebody's church, takes over somebody's world. Jesus lived light on the land. He spent most of his time praying and hanging out with friends. He did a lot of eating, breaking bread, enjoying company with others. And the life of his disciples was a life of radical, not frugality for the sake of retiring early, but generosity for the sake of community. Generosity for the sake of transformation, and generosity for the shape of love. So what we see in Isaiah 65 is that whenever Jesus is at the center of my heart and your heart, whenever Jesus is at the center of a church or a community, it starts to look like Isaiah 65. Animals start behaving strangely. People are able to want what they have. And the economics of heaven becomes the economics of earth. Thanks be to God.
We are a community of believers striving to live out our faith into the world, and this inspiring message, a part of each and every Sunday. You're invited to join us, and to find out more, easy to do. Just go to riversidemccullough.org.